Well, we covered this on the Big Five at 9:05, took some phone calls, got massive reaction to this story. Now, the Quebec government is going to give more than $1 million to several Montreal organizations that run supervised consumption sites. The sites provide safe, clean spaces for people to bring their own drugs to use in the presence of trained staff. Now, journalist Adam Zivo has been covering drug use in cities. He was on our show in May to discuss safe supply programs, and we've invited him back to discuss the latest efforts by cities to curb drug use. Adam Zivo, columnist for the National Post, is on the line. Hi, Adam. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
First things first, I want to go through all the different terms here. Of course, the news here in Quebec from Friday is supervised consumption sites. You have dealt extensively with safe supply, and I know sometimes people confuse these things. So why don't you go through for our listeners the various programs and ways that cities are trying to combat drug use?
Sure. So all of this falls under the umbrella of harm reduction, which includes a wide variety of interventions that are often mixed up. So safe consumption sites involves providing people a safe space and a clean space where they can consume their drugs and where they can be given medical assistance if they need it. Whereas safer supply is when the government hands out free, powerful pharmaceutical drugs, typically hydromorphone, which is an opioid as powerful as heroin, as an alternative to illicit substances on the street, with the idea that if drug users know where they're getting their drugs, that they're less likely to accidentally be poisoned by them. So they're very, very different interventions.
And in your reporting and covering this topic extensively, what have you found when it comes to which of these programs, if any, work or don't work? What have you found?
Well, I found that, safer supply has been widely defrauded, and that's because hydromorphone, though it's as powerful as heroin, is only 1/10 as strong as fentanyl. So fentanyl users don't actually get high off of hydromorphone. So what they do is they receive this free drug, and they take just enough so they can pass urine tests to stay on the program, and then they sell the rest on the black market to raise money to buy more illicit fentanyl. So in this way, safer supply is not mitigating the illicit fentanyl market, it's subsidizing it. Mm-hmm. And this flood of black market hydromorphone has caused the cost of the drug on the streets to decrease by 70 to 90%. Whereas pills used to cost, let's say, $10 to $20 per, they now cost about $1 to $2. And that's been creating new addiction among youth. With respect to safe injection sites and, safe consumption sites, I'm less knowledgeable about that, but what I do know is that some of the research produced in support of that intervention in the 2000s seems to have used fudge data to artificially inflate the program's success and to claim that it reduces crime when it does not, and to claim that it leads to referrals to recovery-oriented treatment when it does not.
Adam, would this be why I see so many conflicting stories on this? And I saw a headline in the Toronto Star about supervised injection sites, and it's advocates saying this reduces crime. The people who live near these sites say, no, it increases crime. Is this why we see a disparity between what advocates say and what people who live in these areas say? Perhaps it's because of fudge data?
Yes, I would believe so. So in the 2000s, a doctor co-wrote 30 evaluations of a program called Insight, which was Canada's first safe injection site. Now, this doctor, Dr. Thomas Kerr, happened to be the same doctor who had advocated for the creation of this program. So, there was an obvious conflict of interest there. And those 30 evaluations all provided glowing reviews of the program, which was suspicious. So the RCMP ended up hiring an independent investigator who evaluated the evaluations. And they found that, that actually, when he contacted local police, he found that safer consumption sites actually significantly increased crime, which led to a huge increase in policing in the region. So, police officers stationed 24/7 around the site, and that policing decreased crime, right? Because if you throw a whole bunch of police in the area, crime is going to decrease. But the evaluations failed to mention any of the increased policing and claimed that decreased crime came from Insight itself rather than from the police, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, and it highlights why it's so difficult to get to the truth of the matter at times when you have all these conflicting things. Now, Adam, getting back to safe supply, because I know that's your wheelhouse here. Earlier this morning, I had a caller call in, and they said, in Britain, they will give addicts a safe supply, and they go every day, and they were making the case that it works. And I know you've looked at what we do in Canada, and you've juxtaposed it, compared it to what they do in other countries when it comes to safe supply. Anything you can tell us on that end? Like, is what Canada is doing, is it the same as we see in other countries?
No, it's not. So there's different models of safer supply, and people who criticize safer supply are often supportive of more responsible models. In Switzerland, where it's been used relatively effectively, you have high barriers to entry. So it's not as if just anyone can get on safer supply. There's more vetting. And on top of that, and this is really crucial, consumption is supervised. So the main issue with safer supply in Canada is that we uniquely emphasize, non-supervision of consumption, because we want to lower barriers for people to access this program. So there's no accountability on whether people consume their drugs or not. In Switzerland and other countries where this happens, you have to consume your drugs on site, unless you establish really strong trust with your doctor. So there's much less diversion, much less black market reselling. Mm-hmm. Now, for that person who called in, there are some studies that say the safer supply work in Canada, but most of the studies are incredibly low quality. And what they are is that they're usually just a collection of interviews with Vancouver-based drug users who are on safer supply, who, of course, have a strong financial motive to misrepresent the program. We would never approve a vaccine or a cancer medication solely based on patient testimonials, yet that's exactly what we're doing when it comes to safer supply.
Adam, the last time you came on this program, we're with Adam Zivo, a columnist for the National Post. He's covered safe supply and drug use in our cities. Adam, the last time you were on, I saw what happened in the aftermath of your reporting. You faced a lot of criticism from people, those advocates that advocate for programs like Safe Supply. What can you tell us? What have been the developments since the last time you joined us with your reporting on safe supply programs in this country?
Well, so the BC government seems to be scared, and they're reevaluating the program. They made that announcement shortly after I published a story about a 14-year-old girl who had died of safer supply overdose in BC. And they've begun to fund more traditional recovery-oriented treatments. The government continues to insist that this is not real, and they're often misrepresenting data to make that case. So oftentimes, safer supply advocates will say, there's no evidence that a significant number of deaths are being caused by hydromorphone, which is the safer supply drug. Therefore, safer supply is not an issue. But that grossly misrepresents the argument being made by addiction physicians who see this as a problem, because it's not the hydromorphone itself that kills people. Rather, the hydromorphone that is flooding communities leads to an increase in addiction. So people get addicted to the hydromorphone. And then as with any opioid, you need more and more and more over time as your tolerance grows. So people graduate to using fentanyl, and then the fentanyl is what kills them. Mm-hmm. But it seems that there's almost no effort being made to investigate whether fentanyl-related deaths are rooted in safer supply. So all of those deaths are being missed. For example, just yesterday, I interviewed a young girl, 15, 16 years old, who got addicted to safer supply hydromorphone. She graduated fentanyl. If she had died, she would not be counted as a safer supply death, even though all of her family and she herself say that safer supply is what got her hooked on opioids and got her onto fentanyl. Wow.
Just shows you what you can do, right? If you've got statistics, how you can say, hey, that's not a death that's related to fentanyl when it is, or vice versa. Adam, listen, we have to leave it there. I want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
That's Adam Zivo. He's columnist for the National Post, and you can read his words over there.